All right, let's resume. I'm gonna go in with brown. we have to close the gap between here and then the highlight. Increase the shadow. And if you're not sure where to distribute the lights, just squint your eyes, you'll see kind of a pattern that you want to try and follow. I'm kind of skipping around to leave myself room for some freckles. Now we're going back to the more orange red. I'm gonna push this. And go into a little brown. And then a tiny amount of black. And we're gonna shade from here inward. Now we're doing the eye. As you can see, there's a lot of cool red. And the thing is not to overdo it. Okay, now let's start doing some of the hair. I'm pressing pretty hard to get those really dark darks. And I am bringing some of the black over that because I'm going to go over it with some white so I can get that grayish. So anyway, I apologize if this is a little bit boring to watch, but maybe it's helpful to see how somebody else would tackle something like this. I know when I was learning to draw, I wanted to watch the entire process. So I'll try to leave in as much information. So as you can see, what happens is once you start adding the hair, I usually wait until this stage. I'll kind of block it in, but it really starts to set the face off because hair is kind of what I like to call like what frames the head, and it really helps to put it in context. It's also kind of part of the costume. I realize she's not actually wearing a costume, but it's just the way that you think of things. I call it a costume. It's like part of the entire look. There's a design and a shape to her hair, and it's no different than if you were actually drawing somebody in a costume. You know, it sort of accentuates part of that look visually. So I include it as, when I lecture about this stuff, I include it as something that's part of the costume. Like the color of the sweater, all of that stuff is gonna be, and you can change it. You know, if you don't have yellow, because we're using, I mean, I do have it here, but I wanted to save that for a different portrait. Right now what we're doing is just using black, brown, red, and white, and then the color of the paper. Obviously when you add one more color, you'll start to get the full color spectrum, but that's the next video, is just keep adding more and more color. But the way that you gain control over a full color palette comes from understanding a limited color palette. So first you start with just graphite or charcoal, and then you do a graphite with white highlights, and then you do a limited palette. Obviously we cheated a little bit and used green, but it's not really part of the color structure. It's more of an accent. And then you keep building your understanding and your awareness of how to make the suggestion of flesh color. So in this case, the reason we don't have yellow is because we have a neutral ground, and I think the lighting is probably a little bit yellow. But if we added yellow to this, it will really start to round out the form. Basically, you don't really miss it, or you don't know that you miss it until you actually include it. And then once you include it, you realize like, oh wow, you know, you can keep pushing this, and then you can add a violet, then you can add blue, you know, instead of using black and white. So for me, this is a really exciting way to teach, because like I've said before, I don't know if I've mentioned this in other videos or not, but our understanding of color for the most part is not very good, because we have an artificial sense of color, since most of us grew up during, you know, using Crayola. And what that means is you have a symbolic form of color. You think green grass, blue sky, yellow sun, but you're not thinking in terms of temperature, and you're not thinking in terms of suggestive color, meaning how if you add complements next to each other, how they set themselves off and they resonate. Instead, with the Crayola color approach, you have a one-dimensional idea where you grab a color and then you plug it in, and so you get this really artificial sense of what color is, and sort of one-dimensional. But so anyway, this I like it's called the Apelles palette, and then later was used by people like Zorn and Rubens and a lot of the old masters. And so this is no different. You're just using colored pencil instead of paint, but it's basically the same understanding and awareness. So I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. I'm gonna do this and then we'll get back after this side of the hair is done, and then we'll continue with the flesh and then the tones, and then we'll figure out what to do with the sweater, whether we're gonna use like an invented color, basically throw on whatever color we want. So if we threw on a blue, that would change the feeling of the whole thing rather than using a yellow. But we'll make that decision when it's time to. All right, so we're back, and I've done most of the hair. I've added a little bit of the highlights in the hair, and so now we need to go in and deal with the shadow on the left side. And oh, there it is. Sorry. Okay, so now we really have to darken this left side. I'm using brown, and then I'll go over it again with black. So I'm going to be doing a couple of different things. One is kind of going in this direction, and then secondly to go in a perpendicular direction. There's a little bit of a highlight at the bottom, and that's kind of up to you if you want to have that. It might look kind of nice to keep some of it, so I'm not actually going to add a highlight. I'm going to let the color of the paper show through, so I'm going to take it right up to that edge, and then you increase the shadow right before, and then kind of feather it out. And then when I go over this with black, you just have to be careful not to obliterate it and make it way too dark in certain. I mean, it is going to be dark in some areas naturally. You want some of that, but you just have to be careful of knowing exactly where to do it. I'm getting down to a nub here. So now I'm going to add the shadow under the chin. I'm using black. So I usually wait toward the end to kind of start pushing my contrast, just because I like to have a little bit more control over the process. And if you push the contrast maybe too early, I mean, this is just for me, you end up with certain surprises, and then it gets a little bit harder to change if it turns out that's not what you wanted. Okay, so I'm gonna go over this area with black. And I'm not pressing very hard, but I'm gonna try and do this in multiple passes lightly. So in order to keep this looking a little bit too weird, I'm gonna go around the edges of the black with a little bit of red to give that transition a little bit more context. Let's see, I've ignored the ear, so let's do a little work on the ear. So brown and black for the shadows. And we'll do a little red. Now I'm using two different kinds of reds. One's a kind of a brownish orange red, and this one's a more of a pop. Oh, I guess this would be more of a scarlet red. Sorry, I forgot what I was doing. Okay, I was gonna trail a little more red. And let's say you wanted to make it kind of pink, because it does, you would just hatch a little bit of white in those areas, and it'll take this scarlet red, and as you add white over it, just ever so slightly, you'll sort of activate it and it'll register as pink. So let's do that right now on the top part of the cheek. And again, when you're doing these things, you know, the amount of pressure that you put down really kind of makes a difference. It's better to have multiple passes of light pressure. I don't know if you're able to see that, but let's do the other side. So again, I'm going over the areas of red to create this kind of pink. And I was doing really light pressure, now I'm increasing the pressure here for this highlight in the middle of the lip. And then I'll go back into it, kind of chisel out some of the shapes that I want. Accidentally broke my lead on the other red. Okay, got it sharpened. So now we're gonna do some really delicate detail work where you just ever so slightly are defining the lines between the lights. So I'm alternating between these two reds. It's kind of a poppy red and the scarlet red. And again, it's not important to go in and do every single, I don't know, whatever that is, maybe little skin blemishes or stuff, but some of it's interesting because it's kind of part of this individual's look. You know, this is what people look like without makeup, and they're interesting for paintings. And I'm not sure that the individual would appreciate that or not, but you know, for us, people who are learning to try and render effects, it's always good to have people who don't have makeup on. Problem with makeup is it creates an even surface that looks artificial, and it hides a lot of the temperature changes. So okay, let's move down. Okay, so there's a more of a cooler red. So this will be done with the scarlet red and maybe some graphite or black. So we gotta get, I feel like the neck, the length should be expanded. So I'm actually gonna change my mind about this mark, which it's not a big deal. If it stays there, I'll just make it look like another shirt underneath or something. I feel like the length of the neck kind of adds to the look. So we'll take our brown and start the neck a little lower. Probably about there. And then I'm going to move this shoulder. Let me see how much space there is. So even something like that, which may seem subtle, it gives, you know, it changes the whole look. You know, makes her look a little bit younger even. Usually you see very young people have really long, they seem to have really long necks, but what in actuality is what's happening is these muscles, the trapezius muscles, haven't come up higher. Usually with older individuals, that those muscles have developed. All right, let's take a look at this at an angle. And the third part, so we're gonna do this in 3 parts. Apologize for making this long, but I feel like I don't want to cram everything into one. We'll take care of the shirt, and then if we decide to do anything to the background, but hopefully this will be enough to get you going.